Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. And if you're listening over on the podcast forums, we appreciate you. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you give us a like, subscribe to that feed as well. Glen, we mentioned this earlier in the week when we were talking recruiting, but it's almost time to flip the calendar over to college football season officially. We are just 1 month away from having a month where there's actual real college football games, and it all kind of kicks off over in Dallas at SEC Media Days. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we expect, what we would like to hear. We'll get obviously, some time with Brian Kelly to kind of discuss things before he heads out into the ballroom there at the Omni Hotel in Dallas. But Glenn, just kind of as we get into the swing of things here, your excitement level, for this season 2024, there's a lot of people have been talking about, year three under Brian Kelly. I'm sure that's going to be a question that's going to be asked a lot, more than a few times this week. But just kind of your thoughts heading into Dallas, maybe some things that you're looking for, some questions that you kind of have planned to ask already.
Yeah, I think first off, I think your math might be a little bit off. We only have 3 or 4 more days until college
Oh,
football returns, right? With the
that's
video
true.
game, and
I said meaningful. This is meaningful,
this
Glenn.
is meaningful stuff right here, Bryce. I mean, I think pretty much everybody that's in media is gonna have, like, a week where they're gonna be glued to their TVs, before they have to get back to their actual work and jobs. So, yeah, we'll be on top of the video game here that drops here in a couple days, and we'll be devising all kinds of schemes to send over to Joe Sloan and the new. Why am I blanking on the defensive coordinator? Blake Baker.
Blake Baker.
Blake Baker will be devising a bunch of schemes to send over to those two guys. So I'm sure they'll take everything into account. But
Of
yeah,
course.
look, in terms of what we're looking for here at media days, I think look, they're bringing Garrett Nussmeier, they're bringing Harold Perkins, they're bringing who's their third guy that they're bringing? I'm blanking
Mason
here
Taylor.
this morning. Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor.
Mhm.
So three guys that obviously are very well equipped and going to be huge pieces of this team going into the year. Kind of my initial thoughts on that were I really like that Harold Perkins is going. Like I think that shows me that he's ready to take on that leadership role in year three. That Brian Kelly obviously views him as a big significant piece for in terms of leadership and kind of what they want the program to represent. I mean, they bring guys that they feel comfortable with to those media
Mhm.
days because it's a all morning kind of scrum where they're going to be dancing around different places, different radio interviews, different places that they're going to have to talk. And Perkins is going here into year three where he's got a lot of expectations on him moving inside, and so I'm sure that's going to be one of the very first questions. Is how he's used this summer to develop. And we talked to him back in the spring, and he was somebody that seemed like he was starting to piece it together in terms of understanding what it takes to be an inside linebacker. But first and foremost, I think that's going to be one of the big questions he has to answer is what kind of progress he's made this summer in terms of development and just how comfortable he is to really fit into what Blake Baker wants to do defensively. And so that'll be one of the first things I'm sure I'll be looking out for. In terms of Nussmeier, we just had a chance to catch up with Nuss about a week ago at the Manning Passing Academy. Don't really know that I have a whole lot for him. I mean, he spent a nice 20 minutes with us and gave us some really good answers. And he's quarterback's coach. He knows how to
Yeah.
talk. He knows what to say, what not to say, and so I imagine we get very similar answers from him that we got about a week ago. But I think just kind of holistically looking at this team, and you have to start with the defense. You have to start with Harold Perkins, but I think you also have to start with what this interior defensive line might look like. And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of intriguing pieces here that LSU is now welcome into the fold this summer with Gio Paez and Dominic McKinley, JVR Suggs. We've heard of kind of the big devotion that Ahmad Bro, the true freshman defensive tackle, has had in the weight room so far. These are all pieces that weren't here back in the spring and weren't huge kind of big name kind of guys. And it showed because the interior defensive line was not very thin, was not very robust with rotation. So
Mhm.
they're going to have a couple of those veteran guys back in the fold with Jacobian Guillory and Jalen Lee, Chemo McAnuel. But I think these new crop of guys that they brought in this summer, how they've developed, how they've kind of invested into the defensive game plan. That's going to be something that I'm really excited to hear about. Just kind of what their initial thoughts are, and just kind of what Bo Davis thinks, and just I think that's all stuff that Coach Kelly will be able to speak on to some degree. So, don't want to take everything here from you, but what kind of things are you looking for? I guess on Monday.
Well, media days first off is a soundbite day. You know what I mean? Like it's a chance for people to get their social media clips, and I guarantee you, there's going to be a Texas A&M writer, a Texas reporter, someone who's deemed as a rival of LSU's, and they're going to try to get Harold Perkins to talk about some type of decision to stay, or was there any thought of leaving? And because look, if you've covered media days in any conference long enough, there's one in every crowd, as the country song goes, Glenn, where someone tries to get someone to say something. And so, look, I think I echo with what you say about Harold Perkins, like getting him up in front of the media, as trying to portray him as one of the leaders of this team, which he should be with his skill set, and growing into that role is going to be massive. I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table, just in terms of maybe a voice on the defensive end of the side of the football. So that's going to be very interesting. And then, like you said, I mean, look, we've been talking about this ever since the turn of 2024. Right in that month of January, Glenn, where you and I recorded about 75 episodes talking about the new coaching hires. The question has been, can it be any better? I think that's going to be a big focal point. And one thing I don't think we're going to get a ton of answers on, but I think is also something realistic for fans to understand is, I'm very interested in what this offense is going to look like. Do I think it's statistically going to be the best offense in the country again? That would be nice, but you do have to be a little bit reasonable in what they lost. Now, it's not saying that this group can't be top 15, top 10. They've got the potential and the talent in house to do such things. But I'm excited to see that. One question that I have continuously always asked every single chance we get to talk to Brian Kelly is the development of Caleb Jackson. That's just something that's just curious to me. We knew last year he, flashed in different ways. I didn't see a ton of consistent snaps, maybe towards the end of the season a little bit more, especially in that bowl game. But his growth as an all-around back, a guy that understands blocking schemes, which way the offensive line wants to block, and just understanding what it takes to be a college football player. He's in year 2. LSU has a lot of people think the top, offensive line unit in the country. So we'll see, if he's going to be a big part. He's going to have had to make some strides and some jumps. And then I think Mason Taylor is always a good interview, just in terms of what he talks about. We talked with him a little bit in spring ball, but I'd love to kind of hear more about, maybe a little more personal for him, like what this season is going to mean for him. Obviously, you want to win, you want to make the playoff, but for him personally, great freshman season, roller coaster sophomore year due to some injuries and just not being able to stay healthy. And then I think, you just look at his junior year where it could be a massive season. You've had some big exits when you look at draft eligible tight ends over the past 2 years. Mason Taylor, who is a guy that when, I was looking at some of the draft boards, not saying Taylor is going to plan to enter in early, but why not? I mean, he has that potential, and a lot of people kind of stopped talking about him last year when he was hurt. So I just think some of the pieces offensively, and then I saw a post on Twitter today talking about CJ Daniels. And, Glenn, you and I were at spring practice together, and Daniels was running a lot with the twos, but this is a guy who was very highly touted coming out of the portal, was a big get. We talk a lot about Chris Hilton, Kyron Lacey, but the big body of CJ Daniels, we saw him even out at, some of the camps. That's a guy that I think that they're going to be able to utilize in some big situations. So just, it's going to be a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, I would say, but just kind of hitting on some of the more personal development with a guy like Mason Taylor and even Harold Perkins to a certain extent are some of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to learning more about.
Yeah, yeah, and I like what you said there about CJ Daniels, because I do think that towards the end of spring, you did see him, and you started to see Xavier Thomas creep into that first team rotation. And at least one day in particular comes to mind. Xavier was dominating one of the final days of
Yeah.
spring camp. He had a really nice practice at the very end of spring ball, and I think he's somebody LSU is going to absolutely utilize this year as a potential vertical threat guy that can complement what Hilton does well, what Lacey does well. He can maybe even be put in the backfield sometimes in some creative different ways. I mean, like, there's a number of different things that I think Xavier Thomas is going to be able to do for LSU. But I also want to go back to what you mentioned about Mason Taylor, because he's also he's second team All SEC kind of caliber guy. I mean, he
Yeah.
was an All SEC caliber player, a couple of years ago as a true freshman. I think he, came out and had some obviously some pivotal moments like the Alabama game where you really got to see kind of his potential. And then you're right, he kind of ran into some injury, unluckiness last year, and I think he's somebody that, once we get a chance to talk to, we talked to him a little bit in spring, but when we talk to him here on Monday, I think he's going to be very hungry and very eager to really show what he's about, because I do think that he and Nussmeier have a pretty natural rapport already. They've
Mhm.
talked about one another going back to the spring, and just how they've kind of developed a nice little chemistry, even in the months, since the spring. So I'm very interested to see what Mason Taylor has to say. One kind of storyline that, I think that will be asked by some media member out there. Could possibly even be me if nobody else brings it up, but just the first game. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we're getting to a point now where LSU has lost, going back to 2019 where they won their first game, but it's been like 4 or 5 years since they've won their first game of the year. And we've talked about it a little bit, but on the boards, but man, it is just so depleting to open your season with a loss. And
Yeah.
you've seen that last couple of years against Florida State, back to UCLA and Mississippi State back in 2020. Like, there's those first game, days after the board posts after that first loss is they're rough, man. And I think LSU needs to needs to find a way to get that win against USC, because I think that will certainly be a good start for them, kind of, in terms of what their overall season and projections are, because you're going to have some really tough games against Ole Miss, against
Yeah.
Alabama, against a lot of Oklahoma to close the season won't be an easy one. Like, there's this is a navigated this schedule can be navigated, because I think most of your tough games are at home for SEC play. But you have to knock out the non-conference. Like, you have to be
Yeah.
able to go into that Ole Miss game on October 12th, 4-0, 5-0, whatever it is, because that I think is going to be really the big kind of transition point in your season, is that Ole Miss game at home on October 12th. And if you're able to go into Las Vegas and get a win over USC on a neutral field, I think you just feel so much better about your chances of, kind of surviving the season and going and making a real playoff push, because that's what this team's goals are at the end of the day. Like, they've talked about it from the very first time we spoke with Brian Kelly, kind of previewing spring ball. They want to be in the postseason. They want to be in that 12-team field, and the only way to get there is to really knock out the non-conference, and not have any blemishes there, and then be very consistent in conference play as well. And so,
Mhm.
I'm going to be very interested to see what their kind of response is to that first game. You only one of the mantras of this program over the last couple of years has been like, well, we're just attacking the first game in front of us. First game's in front of them right now. Like, I mean, they
Yeah.
have a month and a half to prepare for this USC team when they get back for fall camp. So, like, there should be a lot of urgency, I think, to kind of help, to answer those questions when they do pop up, because I do think they will come up.
And I'll add this. I was talking with someone about this the other day when I, looked at fringe playoff teams. I think, just for me personally, LSU is a fringe playoff team right now. I don't think
Yeah.
that they are going to win the SEC, but I think that, to your point, is when you get to a spot where if you can win the first game of the season against USC, you obviously hope that's a resume builder for you. I just think that if LSU can avoid a situation where you head into Thanksgiving weekend needing to win that game to be in the playoff conversation, regardless if you're a 2-win team or you're a 3-win team, or I'm sorry, 2-loss team or a 3-win team, 3-loss team, not a
Mhm.
3-win team. You're not getting the playoff then. But if you can go into the Oklahoma game feeling safe about your playoff chances, that was a win, and I think that's going to take a win against USC. Like
Yeah.
that's the kind of win. I don't think you can beat USC, regardless of what happens against Alabama and Ole Miss, unless you're 11-1 rolling into Death Valley there on Thanksgiving weekend. But just to your point, I like what you said. I think that's going to be a big talking point, Glenn. This third year jump. And look, people have been talking about that all off season long. Like this third year jump that Brian Kelly has made at previous stops. I was asked the other day by somebody, I said, what do you feel like and I'll ask you the question too. What do you feel like the excitement level or the expectation level is for this season. And Glenn, I might be wrong, and so I want you to correct me. This. I said, between a, medium or high. I think it's medium from just people I've talked to. And here's the only reason: this year three talk is obviously really big. Like people want to talk about it, but I think that there's a healthy, maybe unhealthy, viewpoint of overhauling your entire defensive staff and not making some of the moves maybe you should have made in the portal to bolster a defense. Like it's a little tempered. Like I think there's some frustration, if you have a great offense again and a bad defense. But I wanted to ask you that, like, where do you feel like the temperature of this fan base is heading into media days, heading into the 2024 season? Because I think that a lot of fans do understand to a certain extent of we may not have all the dudes right now on defense, or they may not be ready because they're really really young to make a national title run like LSU fans should be hoping and accustomed to looking forward to.
Yeah, and look, I think there's some questions too on offense. Like, I mean, LSU is replacing Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. They're replacing two first round receivers and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. Like, I think the expectation is because the offenses looked so good the first 2 years under Brian Kelly and with a relatively intact staff that's been here since the beginning, that will translate over into this next group. And
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that will happen. But you also have to leave the door open for that maybe not to happen, and maybe the
Yeah.
offense does take some time to get going at the beginning of the season. And if that happens, what will your defense be able to help you out with? Like, I mean, if you have a very similar effort defensively, and it takes your offense a little time to get clicking, you could very well wind up in a very much a Florida State kind of look like last year, like when you got
Yeah.
kind of blown off the field, at the very beginning of the season last year. So I think there are some real questions about this team that well, we won't know the answers to it media days, of course, but you ask the questions and you'll get kind of your staple responses from these players and from Brian Kelly. But I do think there is some trepidation here to kind of go full in, like, oh, this is going to be this is going to be the year, this is going to be the playoff team that gets
Yeah.
LSU kind of in that next step. And I think um, there's a lot of smart LSU fans out there that realize that there's going to be probably some ebbs and flows with this season. Like, this is not,
Mhm.
when you have one of the statistically worst seasons in your program's history, and you can make the argument that personnel wise you haven't upgraded a ton. I mean, I think you can look at safety at Jordan Gilbert, and I think that's an upgrade. I think you can look at some of the internal development, hopefully, that you get from some of these young cornerbacks and some of these edge rushers, defensive ends, and hope that they can kind of take that next step. But you lost three defensive tackles to the draft, and you didn't really replace them with kind of studs and guys that you
Yeah.
really feel comfortable what that will be able to contribute at a high level next year. So lots of answers, lots of questions out there. I mean, the defensive staff, I think, is kind of where you kind of have to hang your hat on if you're an LSU fan, because a lot of these guys are so highly regarded and so good, technique wise and scheme wise with Baker. And I do think that there's reason for optimism with this group to start to show some
Mhm.
improvement. But to just go out there and say that it's definitely going to happen, I think is a bit premature. And I think a lot of LSU fans understand that and know that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to hear kind of what Kelly has to say about the defensive progress. And really they just kind of put the macro stuff in during the spring. I think this fall is really where they're going to get into the nitty gritty of kind of what they want their defensive identity to be. So we'll learn more obviously once fall camp gets going and we're able to see maybe a little bit more of what they want to do or kind of hope to be. We know they want to be aggressive on that side of the ball. We know obviously a big part of that is Harold Perkins being able to play more, I think, off of instinct rather than just being reactionary the whole time, which I think was the problem that you saw in that first game last year. He was just kind of reacting a bunch and not really playing off instinct. And so if they're able to get that guy in the middle of the field to be the impact player that they think he can be, I've made this point a bunch this offseason. I don't know if it'll prove to be true, but I think if he kind of is ready to take that next step as a player, he can cover up for a bunch of your or for some of your mistakes that you might make, whether it's in the back half of the defense or up front, not maybe being able to get consistent push. He's somebody that I think can help, mitigate some of those, issues and concerns. So really excited about kind of what he can potentially be. And I think, again, he's going to be somebody that I'm going to be paying close attention to at media days here, just kind of how he answers questions, how he, what he says. And, I do think that this is going to be a good thing for him and for LSU that he's, making that trip to Dallas.
Yeah, no, and kind of rounding out that conversation, I do agree with you. It's good that he's making the trip. I said on ESPN 104.5 the other day, I think that he's a guy who, when he plays off instincts, and like you alluded to, Glenn, that's when he's at his best. The watch and react aspect was something that I think kind of limited him in what he could do and how effective he could be. So that's gonna be something that's interesting. But hey, we're not gonna hear any declarations at SEC media days. At least not, I don't imagine, from Brian Kelly and LSU. There might be some from elsewhere in the conference.
I
But
mean, last year, one of the things he did say last year, which I think maybe was a little bit kind of overlooked for most of the offseason, but he did talk about how concerning it was that LSU hadn't brought in or they didn't have a whole bunch of returning defensive backs, and
true,
that they had
he
hit
did
the
say that.
portal. I mean, that was a big, like, kind of headline grabber there. I think he actually told Josh Pate that on his podcast, and it kind of blew up that, hey, it's a concerning thing for us that we have a bunch of new guys in that secondary this year. This season, I think you can make the argument like they have a bunch of returning players from that group a year ago, guys that
Hmm.
are young and impressionable, and hoping that Corey Raymond can kind of mold into better football players this year. You're not going to get that same answer, I don't think, from Kelly this go around, but I do think
Yeah.
there's going to be an acknowledgement that they have to be much better for their defense to survive this year, and I'll be very interested to see what he has to say about the secondary as well.
It's gonna be a fun weekend or a gun
Yeah,
fun couple days. And Glenn, we'd be remiss if we didn't say this. I know you just put it on the board. There's gonna be another big event happening in Dallas at the same time. Shout out to Paul Skeens being named the National League's starter for the All
yeah.
Star game. Glenn, I will tell you, people know on the board, I'm a diehard Braves fan. The Braves broadcast crew the other day, I don't know if you caught this, it went a little bit viral, was kind of chastising people if Paul Skeens should be the starter due to some guys who had been waiting in the wings longer. Baseball, you need to market your superstars. Paul Skeens is a superstar, and Glenn, man,
I
that's
think.
Dallas is going to be buzzing with LSU on Monday and Tuesday.
You can make the argument that he has been the best pitcher in the entire MLB since he made his debut, what, 3 or 4 5 weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago? I mean, he
Yeah,
has taken this thing by storm. Um, and look, I mean, I wanna see him face Aaron Judge and, all
why
these
not?
AL
Man,
All-Stars for an inning or 2, like, come on, throw 101, 102 at those guys, see if they can knock it, or if he can have some success. I'm excited for him. I think this is obviously it's a great deal for the program as well, for LSU to kind of be able to say, hey, I mean, here's your blueprint. This is our ace. This is our guy. If you
is
want to
Paul
come.
Skeens really a blueprint though? That's the
Yeah,
problem. We
that's
don't know.
true, that's true. He's probably a one of one for sure, but, I think there's, a lot of things that Jay Johnson's preaching to these recruits right now, and it seems to be working. They've got a handful, 8 or 9 guys, out of the portal that are pitchers that throw 96 to 99. Like, all those guys have high-end velocity, and I think that's just kind of the day and age that we're in, right now with college baseball, so it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, Major League Baseball All Star Game out there in Dallas. Monday night's the Home Run Derby. Tuesday night is the All Star Game. Paul Skeens will suit up. I don't know if you know this,
He
Glenn.
can hit a few
Oakland
home
has a
runs
guy.
too. He can hit a few
Why
home
not?
runs. Back to
Why
his Air
not?
Force days. Why
Hey,
not? Why not?
people would love to see that. Oakland has a guy that throws 104, and so about a month ago, I was really a proponent of I want to see Skeens and this guy from Oakland, Mason Miller, go for the first 2 innings, AL against NL, and we just have the radar gun just blow up because it
Yeah.
cannot compute what's happening out there on the field. But no, it's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna have all the coverage from SEC Media Days in Dallas coming up early next week. Make sure you stay tuned to Go 24/7. A great time to get in on that deal. Still live, still active, and recruiting as well. Just a couple tidbits. Jace Thomas commits tomorrow. That's one that we're watching with a very close eye. And then Derek Meadows moves his commitment back. Is that good? Is it bad? We'll see. And that's a good time for you to join the conversation
That's
over
a
at
good
Go
noise to make when
24/7.
something like that happens.
Yeah, I don't
You
know. I
you
don't
can't
know.
really put that on a board, so, yeah,
Yes,
you
I
can
had to
make that.
verbally get that out so people
Yes,
could
yeah,
hear what that sounds like on their drive.
yeah.
But hey, we appreciate it. That's Glen West. My name's Bryce Koon, and we'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.